Hi, Yinnies, and welcome back to a Yin Yoga Podcast. If you're new around here, welcome. If you are a familiar, welcome back. And if you have been around these parts for a little while, if you've listened to several episodes, or I know some of you have been binged and listened to all the episodes, if that's you and you have not yet left me a 5-star review, I would be super grateful if you would take 2 minutes right now. You could just pause this episode and go into whatever app you're using, whether it's Apple, you can do stars, but you can also leave a written review. On Spotify, you can do stars, but you can also leave comments now. So if you ever want to comment, if you are a Spotify listener below the episode, or if you have questions that you want me to cover, you can always do that in the comments now. So that's a cool new feature. If you're listening to it elsewhere, I don't know how you rate things, but if you could take a moment and give the pod 5 stars, I'd be super grateful. This helps the podcast move up in the search. So if somebody's on their podcast app and they're searching out Yin Yoga, this is going to help a Yin Yoga podcast show up more quickly. And although we are trucking along and doing really well, we're still a fairly new podcast. It was a year ago, September. So if you're listening to this at the time of this recording, we're in spring of 2025, and we started in September, just over a year ago. And so we're still fairly new, but we are, as far as I know, from what I can see, anyways, we're the only Yin Yoga podcast that is still active from my searches, anyways. A lot of them stop and start, and that is super common with podcasts. The percentage of people that make it past a few episodes, even, let alone a year or more, are very rare. So if you've been loving the podcast, I would be super grateful if you took 2 minutes, just pause this, go into your app, give me 5 stars. If you want to leave a written review as well, or a comment if you're on Spotify, that would be amazing. Thank you ever so much for doing that, and for your time, and for coming back to the show. And of course, if you've never been here before and this is your first episode, you can wait and see how you feel first, by all means. All right, my friends. So the other thing I want to mention before we jump into today's topic, which is going to be a good one. How do we start a Yin Yoga practice at home? How do we do that? This came up recently in my teacher training as a question. So we'll talk about that. We'll dive into that. Now, on that note about my teacher training, if you've been listening to the pod and you've been enjoying this and you either wanted to add more Yin training to your repertoire, or you haven't yet had a Yin training, but you've got a big crush on Yin Yoga and you want to take your relationship to the next level, then I would like to invite you to join the waitlist for my training. The link is always in the show notes. You can just click it. It says get on the wait list. And that page tells you all of the things that we are going to cover in our time together. So there's a big list of kind of topics and subjects. So you can scan that and see if that is, in fact, something that you feel was either lacking from your first training or sounds like a good fit for your next training. It's not at all uncommon for people to do multiple Yin trainings. I've had many, many students join who have done Yin trainings with other people, including some of the kind of more well-known folks in the Yin world. I've had people that have done trainings with Paul and Bernie still come to my training and get a lot out of it. So again, you can read the whole who, what, when, where, why, how of what we're covering, and whatever current dates, depending on what you're listening to this, the next one runs. But then at the bottom of the page, or way up at the top of that page, enter your name and email. When you do, the first thing you're going to get is a little free gifty from me. It's a PDF. And then a few days later, you get a video. And the advantage to being on the wait list is that I let the people on the wait list know first when registration opens. So before I put it out on social media, before I even put the link live on my website, the email list, the wait list gets it first. So that's one reason why you might want to join the wait list. Even if you're not looking at doing one this year, just join the wait list. You'll be on there until you take yourself off, or until you take the course and graduate, in which case I put you on a different list. Please know that that's there for you. The other advantage of the wait list is that I give a first 5 people to sign up discount code that is only available on the wait list. And then on the way to training opening, you're going to get these podcasts in your inbox and other good yin bonuses. Sometimes I do roundups of my favorite music, or I'll share poetry, or I'll share a video that you want of me teaching if you want to do some yin. I also have a quarterly free workshop, and so you'll get an invitation to that. So all of this happens when you're on the wait list. So if you've been around for a while and you've been like, I think maybe someday I would like to do some training with Nick, then hop on the wait list. All right, friends, that's enough of that. Let's get into the topic at hand. So not too long ago, just like last season, I did an episode called How to Teach Exceptional Yin Yoga Classes. And one of the many things that I touched on, this idea of home practice as a key to guiding exceptional yin classes. I also touched on this when I was talking with Lita, and on her episode when we were talking about words and wordsmithing. And did you know, dear listener, that if I ever mention an episode in this one that I've already covered, again, in the show notes, there's a link to a Google Doc which lists all of the episodes from like season 1 till current times. They're all linked up there. So it's a great place to check out what other episodes I've done, or if I mention one here and you're like, ooh, I want to check that out, please feel free to check that out. So, home practice. How do we start a home practice? Now, I should be really clear too that when I say home practice, I'm not talking about a led practice from a video. I'm not talking about you pulling up YouTube or your favorite yin teacher and practicing along with video. I'm talking about your own home practice that you do on your own. Now, this has become something that I've now realized is not as common in, I guess you could say, newer teachers. When I first started getting ready to take my teacher training, it was already assumed that we had a home practice. In fact, one of our assignments for that teacher training was we had a journal and we had to keep track of our home practice. And then we handed that in at the end of the year. So it wasn't like super personal, dear diary, today, not like that, but just what time we practiced, what shapes we did, how we felt before, how we felt afterwards, what we might change, that kind of thing. And we had to keep track of that and we had to hand that in. And that was actually like a mandatory assignment in order to get our certificate to do a home practice. And again, I'm not talking about practicing along to a video. Sure, you might be watching a video in your home, so maybe you consider that home practice. But what I'm talking about is a self-led practice. Now, if you are a teacher, I'm going to talk to you about this in just a moment. But I will say, if you're not a yoga teacher, getting a home practice that you do on your own, that you choose the poses, self-led, that can be pretty tricky when you're not a yoga teacher because you don't have the same breadth of knowledge. You don't have as much of an understanding of the poses and what order you'd put them in and blah, blah, blah. So now I'm not saying it can't happen. It absolutely can. I'm just saying that most of this talking about home practice that I'm talking about here and creating your own home practice is going to be geared towards teachers. That being said, when my partner was, sorry, my friends, I have a kitten here that's trying to eat headphone cords. Let's just do this. Okay. When my partner was just starting out on his yoga journey, I was at the time a fairly new teacher. I was teaching, I don't know, like 6 days a week and also had a part-time job. And so I was pretty tired. And I would come home and he'd say, hey, you should teach me some yoga. And I would look at him and think, are you kidding me? I've been doing this all day. I'm exhausted. When I used to tease him because he's a musician and say, imagine that you got paid to play music all day. That's what you've been doing all day. And then you come home and I'm like, write me a song. Wouldn't you be like, come on, seriously? So that's what I told him. I was like, no, I'm not going to come home and teach you yet another class. I've been teaching all day. But I did say, but what I will do is I will put on Paul Grilly's, at the time it was DVD. Now it's available streaming. I'll put that on and we can practice to it together. This is back when we actually had like DVD players and televisions. And we'll practice to it together. And unless you're doing something crazy where I think you're going to hurt your body, I'm just going to do my practice and you're going to do yours beside me. And Paul Grilly will lead us through practice on this DVD. Okay. But here's the thing. It didn't take long before my partner started remembering those shapes and creating his own practice. So then he started practicing without me and without Paul and found his poses, found his favorites, put them together and started practicing what felt good in his body. And this is long before he took any teacher training. So I'm mentioning this because if you are listening to this and you're not a teacher, this is also possible for you from books, from watching DVDs and doing the practice, and then maybe keeping some notes about what poses you liked, what order you liked. This is possible. It will be harder though. So most of this episode is going to be geared towards teachers. Okay, dear yoga teachers, when I mentioned, took my first training, it was assumed that we had a home practice. Now, this was back in the 90s. And so yoga wasn't like totally new. It wasn't like super counterculture still, although a little bit. So there wasn't a lot of people doing yoga and there wasn't a lot of regular classes. And so it was assumed that you would do your yoga class and then you would go home and you would also do a home practice. This was just automatically assumed, whether you were a teacher or a student, that you would do a few things at home. When I signed up for my first teacher training, this was a requirement. This was something we had to sign off on, saying that we would do a home practice. And again, we had to turn in a book. Now, somewhere along the line, and I don't know what year it happened, I don't know in what teacher trainings people stopped telling teachers and budding teachers and teachers that are just starting out that they needed to have a home practice. Like, I don't know where this started getting lost in the yogaverse, but apparently most teachers now that have been trained probably maybe from the mid 2000s onward, if not maybe early 2000s, seem to think that a home yoga practice means I'm going to pop on a DVD or a YouTube video and I'm going to do some yoga along with that. And I'm here to tell you why that's not a good idea. Once in a while, sure, but why that's not ideal. And that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about a home practice. Also, keep in mind that back in the dinosaur age, when I was just starting out as a teacher, there wasn't yoga all over YouTube. Like, honestly, if you searched out yoga practice on YouTube, there was almost nothing. There was, I think, Sadie Nardini had a channel. She was one of the first, and it was super old school. It was just like she pulled up her laptop, didn't have a mic, busted out some moves. I think she might have been like one of the first to actually have a real yoga channel, other than the big companies like Gaiam and stuff, which of course would have only had like a little teaser and then, led you to their website. So I'm pretty sure that Sadie Nardini was the pioneer of YouTube yoga. And so you couldn't just, when I started out teaching, you couldn't just like go to YouTube and find some yoga. It wasn't a thing. Yoga Glow, not a thing. There were DVDs, of course, and VHS. And so you could buy those. Like a lot of my generation did a lot of yoga at home in the beginning with Rodney Yee or Patricia Walden, or I think Gurmukh had some Kundalini ones out. But even then, there wasn't a lot of them. So you'd only have so many practices that you could do along with those DVDs or VHS tapes. AM, PM yoga, that was one that was like really popular. It was like a split where there was like a morning practice and an evening practice. So anyways, when you signed up for a teacher training, it was just assumed that you were going to have a home practice and that was going to be a self-led home practice, not a I'm going to pop on a DVD and let someone else tell me what to do. So why I think this is so important, oh my gosh, there's so many reasons. Well, in that episode that I did on how to teach exceptional yin classes, which is not that far away. It was just last season, a couple episodes. You should be able to backtrack a little bit and find it pretty quickly. Not very many episodes away. I was talking about how if you don't have your own home practice, your own self-led home practice, then you're not going to have your own words when you're teaching your classes. The words that you use when you're teaching are going to be parroted from your teachers or other teachers you've studied with instead of your own words. And in my opinion, in order to be a skilled and effective teacher, we need to speak from our own experience with our bodies, with our hearts, with our minds. That if I'm going to show up to class and I'm going to talk about things, I'm going to talk about them from my own experience. I'm not going to just go up to the front of the room and repeat a bunch of things that I've heard on Instagram or that my teacher has said, right? That is the difference between, in my opinion, an instructor and a teacher. Now, sometimes people think these words are synonymous, but they're not. Anybody can instruct anybody to do anything. You can read an instruction manual. But a teacher comes at this from their own perspective. There's their own kind of essence put into it. So, in my opinion, super important to have your own practice for that reason, so that the words that you are speaking to your students, the quotes that you are sharing, the stories that you are sharing, the sequences that you are sharing come from your own felt, lived, direct experience in your own body, in your own home, with your own self-led yoga practice. So that's one reason. Authenticity of teaching and depth of teaching, so that it's not surface level, blah, blah, blah. You actually have something deeply grounded and rooted in you of which to speak of when you're in front of the room. So that's one reason. Another reason is resourcing yourself. So yoga teacher burnout is a real thing. It is so common. And one of the ways that we can make sure that we don't have burnout is our own practice. So common for teachers to, especially new teachers that are teaching a lot, to push their own practice aside and just focus on, their classes. And I've been there. I've done it. At one point I was teaching like 15 classes a week, 6 days a week. And so my yoga practice definitely took a nosedive. And then guess what followed? Burnout. Yeah. So your yoga practice, your own home self-led practice, is a place for you to sort of unfurl, to cozy up, to lick your wounds, to do whatever it is that you need to fill up your own cup. It's the time that you take out for you so that you can be present for your students, your loved ones, your community, the world at large, right? You cannot pour from an empty cup. And watching a streaming or a DVD or a YouTube video and just practicing along with them does not ensure that you are getting your own individual needs met as a teacher. Sure, it's fun. I'll talk more about where these things are useful later. But only if you drop in to yourself what it is that you need. And you can use your self-led home practice to fill that gap, right? To help to fill your cup. Also, can we just talk about practicing what we preach and not being a hypocrite? How many times have you said to your student, I know I say it all the time, hey, if you did this pose at home, blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, you could do this pose at home, and here's how you might do that. So you're giving your students tips on how they could practice at home. I hope you are, so that they could, even if it's just one pose, so that they can kind of take their yoga home with them and not just only do it at the studio once a week or whenever they come. And so my hope is that you would be taking that advice yourself as well. So burnout, a big reason to have a home practice. Learning to be an authentic teacher. So you're speaking from your own experience and your own voice. Another great reason to have your own self-led practice. Practicing what you preach, there's a third good reason. Okay, so here's the thing though. Now this is going to be, some of this will be universal to whether or not you're a teacher or a student. Sometimes we have these silly ideas about what a home practice that is self-led needs to look like. Let me paint the picture of what a lot of us assume. We need to have a yoga room in our house. We need to have the right incense, the best yoga music, comfy clothes. We need to have lots of space, and we need to have about 90 minutes in order to do our home yoga practice. We need to have all the props. Wrong. None of that needs to happen, actually. Maybe your home yoga practice is 90 minutes. What a gift. If you can, if for those of you, especially that don't have small people around, if you can carve out, 90 minutes in your life for a practice every day, amaze balls. Do it. Your body, your mind, your spirit will thank you. You will be a better teacher. You will be a better citizen. Nothing bad can happen from that. Now, that being said, some of you do have small people around, and finding time without them, getting in your business to do some yoga can be challenging. And I am not a mother. Let's just say that. Not of humans. I am a mother of cats. And they also interrupt my practice constantly. There's 3 things that you can do about that if you have small people around. You either wake up before they get up, if you're a morning folk, which means you got to go to bed earlier the night before, by the way. This doesn't mean like just get less sleep. No, this means who cares about the dishes, go to bed if you're a morning person. Or if you are more of an evening person or your kids have an early bedtime, then maybe, just maybe, instead of laying on the couch and watching that next Netflix thing in your series, you toss out your yoga mat and you take some time to practice. And yes, that means that we do less of other things. That's what dedication it requires. Yeah. Like, do you think all the teachers and generations before that had a self-led home practice didn't have other things they could be doing? I mean, yeah, okay, we didn't have streaming, but like we couldn't have gone to Blockbuster and just rented a shit ton of movies and watched all of those. Of course we did. You didn't think that we could have gone out, done stuff with our friends instead, or just, busied ourselves incessantly cleaning our house to avoid practice? Of course. We aren't any busier now than we were when I started teaching yoga and when I took my first teacher training. We're not any busier. We're not really busier. Now we are busying ourselves more, right? We're on the social media, we're scrolling, we're always attached to our, our devices. Yes, that is real. That was not around. But 90% of what you do on there is just busying yourself. It's not actually required of you in any way, shape, or form. And I would argue that a home practice would suit you far more than that extra 15 minutes you spent on Instagram. And if you don't think you spend 15 minutes on Facebook or Instagram, you can get these like tracking devices on your phone that'll track how much time you spend on your social media apps or whatever they are. I would encourage you to do that and see if you're right, because you might be surprised. I mostly use social for business, very tiny bit for personal, but not much. And I'm not at all surprised by the amount of time that I spend on there. Sharing things, resharing things, seeing what colleagues are up to. Like it's a big chunk of my time. And if I have to choose, if I've got 15 minutes and I got to choose between 15 minutes on Instagram, 15 minutes in a home practice, I'm going to choose the home practice. So the first myth that I want to bust is that, first of all, that your home practice has to be 90 minutes and that we don't have time. You do have time. Unless you are a single parent of multiple young children and you work more than one job, you have time. You're just not making time. You're spending that time somewhere else that you value more than your home practice. And all you need to do is switch so that the home practice becomes more valuable than whatever it is that you're spending time on. And a lot of it is just silly online busying ourselves stuff, Facebook or Netflix or whatever. So first of all, let's bust the myth that we have to have 90 minutes to do this big, long, beautiful practice. And we have to be uninterrupted, and we have to have the best incense and perhaps the best music if you practice with music, and no small people around and no noise. And come on, really? This is not real life. This is an exotic retreat that you're describing here in your own head. So if that's the kind of myth that you had or the story you had about what it means to have a self-led home practice, you just got to let all that go. In order to commit to practice, I do recommend that you pick an amount of time. Not that you can't extend it. Be realistic, but pick an amount of time that you are going to do your practice. Is it 15 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it longer? Whatever it is, be realistic and pick that amount of time and stick to it. Even though Netflix is calling and Instagram is calling, and there's always something we need to stay informed on. But no, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, hour and a half if you've got it, 2 hours if you've got it, whatever the time is that you can carve out, you need to carve it out, and you need to actually, here's the clincher, dun, 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 put it in your calendar. I know. Because if you don't put it in your calendar, especially if it's a new habit, it's not going to happen. You're just going to keep going about life the way that you have been, and you're going to forget. Once it's a habit, then you can take it out of the calendar. But you pick the time you're going to practice. Maybe it's slightly different, on the weekends than it is during the week. And you put it in your calendar with an alert, a reminder. Maybe you get a reminder the day before, or say you practice in the morning, maybe you get a reminder in the evening, right after dinner time that, oh, tomorrow morning we're going to practice. So that you remember, oh yeah, I can, let someone else deal with the dishes and go to bed early, or the dishes will still be there in the morning, I promise you. Or I can decide not to watch a whole movie on Netflix and I can go to bed earlier so that I can practice in the morning, or vice versa. If you're a nighttime practicer, maybe you okay, I can turn off the screens and I can settle into my practice. Okay. So first I'm going to call bullshit on this. We need 90 minutes, perfect silence, blah, blah, blah. Second thing I'm calling bullshit on is that you don't have time to practice. Yeah, you do. You just take it away from somewhere else that it is not needed. And again, it can be a short practice, does not need to be long. But again, unless you're a single parent of multiple small children with more than one job, you got time. You're just not spending your time mindfully and skillfully. You're spending your time in places where you don't realize that you're wasting it. And you could pull that back and make it your own, that time for your own practice. And then let's just talk about environment. I mean, I don't have a yoga room. I don't have a separate, I would love to have a room that was my office/yoga room, but I don't. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment, but my partner's a musician, so he has the second bedroom. Right now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you are seeing me in my living room. This is my fireplace behind me. Not real fire, just, decorative fireplace. Now, that being said, because I do a lot of Zoom, I don't have a real living room like most people do because I'm a yogi. Like we do have one big comfy chair in the corner, but we don't have a couch and a sectional and a TV and all that. No, it's mostly open floor space, lots of bookshelves, and this little fireplace that those of you that are watching can see behind me. So there is just room for 2 mats in this living room if we are strategic for my partner and I to practice together. But it is not a separate space. It does not have a door. One of us can't be practicing while the other one does dishes without hearing it. All of these fantasies that we have are lovely. I have that fantasy too. I would really love like a yoga room that I could also use as my office when I'm recording and I could practice in there. Wouldn't that be lovely? But I don't. So you have to make use of what you have. So maybe it's a corner of your bedroom. I see a lot of corners of people's bedrooms now that I teach on Zoom, or corners of guest rooms or whatever. Or maybe you just kind of move the coffee table out of the way in the living room and you just sprawl out there. So you don't need your own individual yoga room in order to have a practice. If you have that ability, great for you, especially those of you that are teachers, then great. Enjoy, decorate it, get excited about it, make it somewhere that you genuinely want to hang out and spend time for a long time and practice in there. But 90% of us, that doesn't happen. So all you need is a space slightly larger than your yoga mat. That's all. In fact, with yin, you don't even need a yoga mat. You could throw a blanket down. So let's bust that myth that we need to have the perfect yoga environment. If you are choosing to practice while your children are awake and you have small children, you will have to include them in your practice, depending on their age. I had a student that during the COVID times would Zoom class with me, but she would just put the kids in the other room with a movie, and then she would come into the next space and she would do yoga with me. And the kids very rarely interrupted because it was only a 90-minute practice and they weren't tiny. Now, of course, if you have small kids, yeah, they might be all over you. And so you have choices then. You either learn to practice with them, like I do with kittens. You learn to step over them, pick them up, move them as needed, and continue with your practice. Or you wake up early, or you do it when they're in bed. Those are your options. Or if you happen to be working from home and they're in school, maybe you can sneak in a lunch hour practice. Who knows? But you either have to learn to work with the kids being there in the practice and just kind of work around them, or you practice when they're not around. Now, if you don't have children, you don't have small children, come on now. Tell me you don't have time to practice. You're not prioritizing it, that's all. So you don't need the perfect incense. You don't need a special outfit. Most often when I'm practicing, I'm in pajamas, especially if it's yin, because I like my pajamas. So I'm usually wearing those. I'm in my living room with kittens crawling all over me. And if my partner is doing something else other than yoga, I would be hearing whatever it is he's doing. This is real life. If you want to practice with music, great. If you don't, great. You don't need the perfect music. If you're struggling to find music, drop me a note. I'll hook you up. I got a playlist that I love. So none of these things are actual real reasons to not practice at home. And when I say home practice, I'm talking about self-led practice, not I threw on a video and now I'm following along with that. Okay, so that's the sort of me calling BS on all this. I don't have time. I can't practice at home stuff. Now, why might you want to, though? Other than, of course, it's going to make you a more authentic teacher and help you teach more exceptional classes. It's going to help you fill your cup. You might be thinking right now, yeah, but I can get that. I can get filling my cup from watching an online thing or streaming something or other. No, you can't. That's a predetermined sequence that somebody else created based on what they thought you might need. But when you do a home practice that is self-led, then you are choosing your own practice based on your own needs. So the sequence is based on your needs, right? And one of the students in my current round of training asked, okay, but how do I actually do that? Like, how do I decide what poses to do? Well, how do you decide what poses to do for your students? Don't you sit down and write a sequence? No, I'm not saying you need to write a sequence. I don't in my own practice. But I'm just saying you already know how to string some poses together if you're a teacher. Now, if you're a student and you're not a teacher, this might be a little trickier for you. You might want to follow along with a book for a while and then just make some notes about like what poses you liked and what orders you liked. And then eventually you can put together your own practice. But for those of you that are teachers, you're already putting together practices all the time. You just got to put one together for yourself. Or if you want to be more organic, like I am, and I'll describe that in a moment, then you can do that. But if you're like, I don't know how to get started practicing. Well, how did you get started sequencing for your students? Didn't you just sit down with a pen and paper or a computer and type out a sequence? Same. So you could do that. You could, sit down, carve out some time, maybe create a few sequences for you that kind of are custom to your own body, to your own needs, to your own goals, to, your own injuries, tight spots, etc. And then you could have those to refer to. You could do that for sure. What I do is far more organic than that. As a start of my practice, I sit down on my mat, I close my eyes, I cross my hands over my heart, right hand first, because I'm a right-handed person. If you're a lefty, left hand first, and then the other hand over top. And I first start with gratitude. So in this gratitude, I'm going to be thanking for the gift of yoga, for the time that I have to practice, for my body, for the teachers that have come before. So I always start with gratitude. There's a whole bunch of neuroscience around gratitude practice and crossing your hands. That could be an episode for a whole other time. You can check out Rick Hanson's book. I think it's called Buddha's Brain for more on that. But I always start with gratitude. So I sit down, I get comfortable. I've usually got my tea. I've gone pee already. So none of that's going to interrupt me. And I sit down and I do my gratitude. And then with my hands still on my heart, I ask myself questions like, how am I feeling? Physically, mentally, emotionally. I take a moment to just sit with whatever comes up. And then I ask myself, what do I need right now? What do I need right now from this practice? What do I need from this practice? And that's how I decide what I'm going to practice. Maybe some days, this is rare nowadays, but maybe some days it's like, actually what I need is to get up and stand up and move. I need to do like a fairly strong kind of hatha practice, right? Again, like I said, rare nowadays, but maybe. Or maybe I need a yin practice, or maybe I need just yoga nidra, or maybe I need to meditate, or maybe I need a little bit of all of that. So take a moment to sit down with yourself and ask yourself, what do I need? How am I feeling mentally, emotionally, physically? And what do I need? Just if you were working with a client one-on-one, you would sit down with them at the beginning and ask them how they were doing. And you might, especially at the very beginning of working with them, like what their goals were, what they were hoping to get out of yoga practice. So why can't you do that for yourself? I think you can. So what do I need mentally, emotionally, physically? How am I doing? And then that's how I decide what to practice. Now, I will also say that generally speaking, I tend to, if I'm, a little bit brain emptied and I don't want to think, I tend to do my class recipe, which is some sort of forward bending posture. Now, by forward bending posture, I don't mean stretching your hamstrings per se. I mean, child's pose could be a forward bending posture. So something to ground the spine forward, a back bend, some kind of a twist, some kind of a lateral or side pose, and then maybe something for my hips and my butt area. I always include something for my neck and shoulders and my upper back. So if I'm struggling because my brain is really tired to come up with like, well, what do I need? I mean, that's a great recipe right there. Give yourself a back bend, a twist, a lateral pose, some sort of forward rounding posture. Maybe you work on your neck or shoulders or some other tight spot if you've got a trouble spot that is causing you some drama. Maybe you spend a little time there. And then the thing that teachers tend to skip the most when they do their home practice, and I've been guilty of this, is shavasana. Or you could also sit in meditation. And I'm going to just call us all out on that because I know I'm not alone. But just like you tell your students that this is often the most important part of the practice, it still is for you too. So set yourself a little timer, maybe one with a sound that's not going to be annoying to, come out of, and get your meditation or your shavasana going or your nidra or whatever it is. And you need to close your practice also with some quiet inward time. Somewhere along the line, as we started training yoga teachers, we no longer expected them to have a home practice. And this is just one of the many things that I believe has gone wrong in the yogaverse. You cannot have a depth of teaching if you don't have a depth of practice. And I would argue that there is a big difference between being a yoga instructor and a yoga teacher. Anybody can stand at the front of the room and bark out alignment cues and commands and things. But it takes a whole other level of presence and maturity and wisdom to be at the front of the room and hold brave space and to actually guide people from that sense of grounded, first hand, personally lived experience that comes from having your own practice and sharing from your own experience in your own life. So how do you start a home practice? Number one, acknowledge you need a home practice. Really acknowledge that. Like, don't just, yeah, I know I should probably have a home practice. No, like, I'm committing that I'm going to have a home practice. That's number one. Number two, put it in your calendar, because if it isn't scheduled, it ain't real and it's not going to happen. You're going to get busy. You're going to do other things. And then before you know it, oh my God, I didn't do any practice. So put it in your calendar. Pick a time that is realistic and an amount of time that is also realistic. You can always do more. But if you've got like little people around and a busy family and you're like, I'll be lucky if I can get 20 minutes in the morning or 20 minutes at night, then put 20 minutes in. You can always do more if it ends up being that you got more time, but be realistic. If you're not realistic with how much time you have, you're not going to do it. You're going to feel like you've failed at it, and then you're just going to give up and stop. So, number one, acknowledge you need a practice at home. Really wrap your head around that. If you are a yoga teacher, in my humble opinion, this is not optional. Number two, put it in your calendar. Decide when is the most realistic, how long, and get it scheduled, and schedule a reminder or an alert of some sort, because you won't remember initially. You won't remember because it's not part of your habit. Once it becomes habitual, where it's like, oh, just every night at this time, I practice. Every morning at this time, I practice. Or every lunch hour, because the kids are in school and I'm working from home, I practice. Whatever it is for you, like whatever time, it's not a habit yet. So put it in your calendar, carve out the right amount of time, and give yourself some sort of an alert, maybe the night before, the morning of, if you're going to do it at night, however many alerts you need. So do that. And then find a place that you can practice. It doesn't need to be a special yoga place. It could be like beside your bed, could be in the guest bedroom, could be in a hallway if no one's using it at the moment, wherever you can find some space. Get your props, get your equipment, and do that. Now, if you have the privilege of a yoga space or a guest bedroom or a room that's like an office that you can just like leave your props out, that's a great way to remind yourself to practice. If you can leave your mat rolled out and your props there all organized, all pretty, so that every time that you walk by it, you go, right, yoga, then that's a great way to help you remember to practice. It's like a gentle nudge every time you look at it. Now, that being said, we can't all do that. You may have to roll it up and put it away if you don't have that space. But for those of you that have the privilege of the space, leave your stuff set up, make it pretty so that every time you walk by, you're like, oh, hey, there's my yoga mat. And then sit down and just get quiet and ask yourself, what do I need? What do I need from this practice? What is my body asking for? What is my energy level asking for? What is my spirit asking for? And then that's how you decide what to practice. I do want to say that as a teacher, there's nothing wrong with going to someone else's class. There's nothing wrong with occasionally popping on a YouTube thing and doing a practice. Notice I said occasionally. This can be helpful for inspiration, ideas, or community, especially if you're going out to a class. That can be nice to kind of, especially if you go with a friend or something, go to a colleague's class to build community, to build connection. That's all fine. But that does not count as your solo-led home practice. That's an add-on. That's a bonus that you can do every once in a while if you want to, as a fun thing. That doesn't count as a home practice. Actual home practice is solo-led. And by the way, if you as a teacher right now are like, yeah, but whenever I try to do my own practice, my mind is really busy. Yeah, duh. Whose mind isn't busy when they're trying to practice? Your students are dealing with that all the time when you're teaching them. They're dealing with their minds. What makes you think that you get a get out of my mind card We're all dealing with our brains. We're all going to deal with irritation, impatience, frustration, sleepiness, boredom, whatever happens while we're practicing. This is not an excuse not to practice. Part of dealing with yoga is dealing with your mind. And if you didn't get that in your 200-hour, go back to your Patanjali and do some reading, because that's one of the first crosses to bear that we have as we practice. It's dealing with our brains. So I hope that you got something out of this gentle smackdown, my yoga teacher friends, about practicing at home. Remember to cut yourself some slack and start slow, but don't let yourself off the hook. And some of you, I've done this before where I've fallen out of my home practice, where I had the really dedicated home practice and then stopped for a while. Maybe this is a relaunching of your home practice for you. Maybe you used to always have a great home practice, and then somewhere along the line, it got pushed aside for cleaning the house or Netflix or Facebook or Instagram or children, who knows? And maybe this is your encouragement to rekindle that love of your home practice. Your home practice should be a refuge for you as a human, as a teacher, to unfurl your mat, to soothe, to ground, to anchor, to lick your wounds, to heal, so that you can actually put some good out into the world. Because you cannot pour from an empty cup, dear teacher. When you try to, it leads to burnout. I know from experience. Okay, my friends, please take this as inspiration, a little gentle kick in the ass to get your own practice going. And let me know how it goes. If you're on Spotify, you can leave me comments. Let me know how your home practice is going. Was this the gentle kick in the butt that you needed to get a home practice started or to rekindle? You can also always message me on Instagram at Nick Danu Yoga or at Yin Yoga Podcast, and let me know how this episode helped, if it helped, you to get back on your home practice or to start a home practice. And until we meet again, bye for now.